Hey, welcome back to Mistake Man. This is part two of my series of videos where I'm building a Zentraedi Battlepod from Robotech or Macross. In this video, I'm going to be deciding on a color scheme and finding the right mix of colors to paint the model, getting it ready for painting, and doing the painting. So let's pick up where we left off. As far as color scheme goes, I don't necessarily want to go with what they've got here on the pictures. That blue is just a little bit too dark for me, and this kind of blue-gray is too dark as well. I think I want to go with something more akin to what you see, in the cartoon, where it's more of like what they show on these pictures on the side of the box. This is more in line with what you see in the show, and where the pod is like a light blue, and then the legs are basically white or really really light gray. So that's more what I'm gonna go for. So here's what I came up with. For the blue on the pod, I've mixed up some of this Ceramcoat Ultra Blue and white, and this is a 1:2 ratio to get that kind of nice light blue color. And then I think what I'm going to do is for this part of the pod, this kind of diamond shaped feature in the front, plus the thruster pods on the side, and possibly the gun knob, little gun bull is just not any better than knob. The little gun bubble on top, I'm going to paint those just straight white. Then for the other parts down here, for the lighter parts on the legs and this lower portion of the pod here, I want to do. I don't want to do those the same white, but I don't want them to be like dark gray or dark blue or anything like that. So I decided to kind of mix around with some really light blues. And so I came up with this right here, and that's a mixture of this blissful blue, which is just kind of a nice light blue color. But yeah, it's definitely darker than white, as you can tell against the paper, but it's a little bit blue, but almost just kind of gray. So it's just like a bluish gray, which I think goes well. And then that little patch there next to it is, I have a bunch of paints that I mixed up back here for my previous build of the USS Defiant. I've still got mixed up a whole bunch of that paint for the different colors on the hull, and I was curious to see, because this is kind of a light blue as well, kind of more of a blue gray, but I wanted to see how this compared to that, so I put a little bit next to that, and you can see it's definitely more on the gray side and even darker than what I have there. So it was just a bit of curiosity there. Basically, what they've painted white here, I'll paint in actual white, and then anything they've painted this kind of blue gray, I'll paint with my blissful blue mix, and anything black I'll paint charcoal. So I finished painting the dark gray on these components, as you can see. I had an idea to make the lower portions of the model that are in this dark gray color to be, see here how they're kind of like got like blue highlights. I like the way that looks. I think that looks pretty cool, and I try to figure out ways of doing that, of actually adding blue paint on there, or kind of doing some kind of shading with various depths of blue, kind of like what miniature painters do with some of their models, to kind of give them, what do they call it, like glazing or something like that. I don't know how to do that. I've never done that before. I would definitely want more practice, especially to do something on this size. I would want to be confident in my ability to do that before trying to attempt it here. But another thought that I had was inspired by Boyd over at Trekworks here on YouTube. Um, he did a video, a build of the Batwing, and he painted it black and then put like a paint that was like a blue iridescent sheen, just like misted over it. And so it was really subtle kind of blue highlights and it looked really cool. And so I thought I could try to do something here. I've never done that before. I went back and watched that video to figure out what he did, and he mentioned a specialist paint that I don't have. So I thought maybe I could try and do something with some paints that I do have. And I have this Tamiya metallic blue X13, and it's kind of got like a dark, shiny metallic blue. I mean, at least the cap is that color. In here, it's a little brighter on the bottom. But I thought something like that, if I could get just a thin coat of that, just like misted over the gray, then it might turn out to be just what I'm looking for. So I did thin some up and run it through my airbrush, practiced it on a spoon that had some dark colors on it, and it just didn't look good. It wasn't what I was going for anyway. The metallics just came out. Either I had to put so much on that it to smooth out the look that it ended up just looking like that, which is obviously not what I'm going for. Or if I didn't put enough on, that it just ended up looking sparkly. The metallic flakes, either the flakes themselves were too big, or just the way my airbrush would, the pattern that my airbrush was spraying was just putting down more of a speckled look with the metallic. And so it ended up looking sparkly blue rather than just kind of like a blue sheen. And so I didn't like the result here. So I went to a craft store just to see if they had like some acrylics that have like a blue, metallic blue, and kind of went through their art acrylics, and I ended up finding this. It's a brand called Golden Fluid Acrylics. I've never used before, but this interference blue is what they had. And if you see, like they actually paint, this is cool. They actually paint a little test swatch over this. I didn't paint that there. That came that way. They were all like that on the shelf, which is really really cool. So it's mostly clear. It's kind of got maybe just like a slight, yellowish look to it. But if you look at the reflection off of it, you get that nice iridescent blue sheen. And so as soon as I saw this on the shelf, I was like, that is perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So I got it, brought it home. I thinned some out. It thins out to just kind of like a milky white color with just that blue sheen off of it. Anyway, I ran it through my airbrush, and my airbrush struggled with this. It I had to have the airflow turned up pretty high, and the paint flow turned up really high, because I'd turn the paint flow up all the way so it would just be blasting paint out, and then if I tried to turn it down even a little, then it would end up just clogging. Not clogging to the point where I had to like break it down and clean it out, but it would just stop. The paint would stop flowing until I opened it up and increased the paint flow more. Then it would start going again. So it was blasting paint out. So had to hold the piece like way back like this and just kind of just really blast it and kind of lightly mist over it just a bit at a time, until I got what I was looking for. And I had a similar thing happen where if I just did a light dusting of it, then it kind of looked a little bit sparkly. Not nearly as bad as this stuff. This was like glitz and glam, glittery, really sparkly stuff. But this was definitely more subtle than that, but it was still not quite what I was looking for. It was a little speckly. And I don't know if that's just the size of my airbrush needle, the consistency that I was able to get this. I did put a bunch of this retarder medium in just to hopefully help it flow a little bit better. I think it helped, but I really couldn't get it to flow smoothly without just blasting. I just went ahead and kept layering it on until the finished looked, until it had about the right sheen, But then the blue was a little bit too vibrant, a little too in your face. And so I was worried that it wasn't going to work. But then I thought, where this is an interference blue, like an interference color, that that blue color comes from, it can be affected by clear coats that you would put on top, and they can tend to tone that down a little bit. So I thought maybe that's exactly what I want to do here. So I took the piece that I had just sprayed on and it put too much on. Let me show you what I mean. So here's a piece that I just sprayed it on until it was not speckly anymore, and it was just more of an even sheen. But the blue is pretty obnoxious, right? It's pretty bright, and so let's see if I can get a good. There we go. You can tell that that's quite the blue color going on there. At least I think it's a little more blue in person. But anyway, so I thought maybe putting the clear coat on here will tone that down a little bit, and it totally does. So this is one where I basically coated it the same as this one, but then I put the clear coat on this one, and it definitely tones it down. I don't know if you can, yeah, you can kind of see. Yeah, that's pretty good right there. So you can see the one on the right, if I can get it to focus. So the one on the right has got more of a sparkly and more of a bright blue shininess to it, but the one on the left is more muted. You still see the blue for sure, but it's a more muted blue, and it's not as sparkly. From far away, it looks pretty good. I would be happier if it was a little less blue than this. Like I said, I think I'm just going to do the parts that are, from here down. So basically just the legs and the hip joint in the middle. The guns and thrusters and stuff that are on the top half of the model that are part of the pod, I don't think I'm going to do that to them. I considered doing something similar, but rather than having a blue sheen, just having more of like just a gray metallic sheen. I might experiment with that a little bit just to see if I can get something that looks good. If not, then I would be happy just leaving them with just the dark gray. I did spray the gray parts that are on the legs. You can see they're very blue. But when I get that clear coat on there, I think that's going to help tone those down a little bit. If they still look a little bit too blue, I guess I could always go back in and just lightly dust over more of the gray just to tone that down a little bit. So that's always an option. Okay, clearly I overdid it on the interference blue color. That's just way too in your face, or I guess too in my face. I'm not a fan of how vivid that blue is. I wanted it to be more subtle than that. So um not quite sure how I'm going to address that. I've had a couple of ideas. One is to just go back to the airbrush booth, and this is my charcoal gray that I was the original color beneath the interference blue. So just go back and try and do a light misting of that color over the top of it, and just try to tone that down a bit. Another idea was to try and use some of this Tamiya smoke, where it's got, it's transparent, but it's got a nice uniform darkening effect. That might also work well. I think with this, I can more easily control and get an even coverage, where trying to spray on a thin mist of this, I might run into the same issues I had with the blue, where I can't, in order to get good even coverage, I have to put so much on that it just overdoes it. So, but one potential issue with this is that it might, where I'm putting like a thick clear layer over, it might just completely destroy the whole interference blue effect. But I don't know. So I think this is going to be the easiest to test. I can just do that right now. Just put a little bit of that on here and see what it looks like. I finished running my experiment with This leg has the charcoal gray, not over the whole leg. I just tested it on this front toe here, and as you can see, it definitely dulled that down quite a bit. I like the way this looks. This is more what I was going for, where it mostly just looks gray, but then you can just kind of see around the limbs and just where some of those reflections are, that it's got that blue, hint of a blue reflection to it. That looks cool. I like that. The only drawback is I do have to be careful not to overdo the gray on top of the blue, like I overdid the blue on top of the gray. So definitely need to have more careful hand when applying the gray over this. Now for the clear smoke is what I did again, just on the toe here. And it was a glossy finish, so I did hit it with some matte clear just to tone down that gloss. It's still kind of shiny, but definitely nowhere near as shiny as it was. My jury is out on this effect. It did definitely tone down the blue. You can see it's not nearly as bright as these parts that I didn't put the clear smoke on. So, it definitely looks darker, but it's still more blue than this other one here that has the gray treatment on the outside. It's a cool looking effect. Something like that would look really good on a car body. So after looking at these for a while, I think this effect is really cool looking, but I think it's not quite what I want for this. So I think I'm going to go with this one. I just like that it basically still looks gray. It just has blue highlights. That was my original vision for that. So yeah, I think I'll go with that. All right, so I've toned down that iridescent blue color. There's still some on these parts here, but those are going to be covered over with a completely different color paint anyway. It's just these parts here. So there's still a bit of a kind of a blue shimmer there just on the highlights when you turn it around. But it's much toned down. So that's definitely more what I was going for. It looks gray, but has the blue highlights. So there you can see that's how much that's been toned down from what it was. But like I said, you can still see it, but much more subtle. So that is good. I'm pleased with that. While I was at it, I decided to go ahead and do a similar sort of effect on the upper half of the pod. The blue effect here is for the lower half of the pod, and I didn't do any of the blue on the gray parts of the upper half of the pod. But I had considered doing more of just kind of like a silvery gray metallic. The same idea, but just with a silver gray color, not blue. And at one point I decided to just not really bother, but since I'm doing this thing where I have to go back over it with the gray to tone it back down, I decided let's give it a try. So I ended up doing that with the parts above on the upper half of the pod. And you can see the metallic effect more pronounced on this little ring down here, because I didn't focus on really covering it up there too much, because that's going to be covered over with the blue white later on. So but you can kind of see it on that ball, and it's mostly gray, and it's kind of hard to tell unless you compare it to, I guess I've got these that are the original. Nope, never mind. I've masked over those. You can't see that. I guess you can kind of see it there with along the sides that are going to get painted. So there's a bit of kind of a shimmery metallic highlight to that compared to the original. Did it on the thrusters as well. I let more of the metallic come through on the thrusters just because I was okay with them looking a little bit different than the guns. and so they're not quite as dark gray as the guns are. So yeah, I think that's going to look good. I think at some point I'm going to go back in and maybe hit a few of the high spots um, with the actual just like bare metal metallic, just kind of look like parts that maybe have kind of been scuffed or scraped and the bare metal from underneath is showing through. Never really done that before, but I've seen other people do that, and it is a cool effect, so I'm going to give it a try. As you can see, I masked off all of the dark charcoal painted sections of the model and painted all of the parts that need to get the my blissful blue plus white color here. For most of these components, that's pretty much it for the painting. Okay, let's take a look at one of these guys. I'm eager to see how that iridescent interference blue on the charcoal gray looks against this blue white. Yeah, I like that. I'm happy with how that turned out. Yeah, I'd say that turns out pretty good. I like how that looks. Now these little thrusters in the back are currently painted with the charcoal and interference blue like the rest of this. I think I'm going to do something else with those. More just kind of like probably something more like this, where it's just the dark gray metallic. Okay, so here we go with the parts that are all got their masking off. Nice collection of parts that are pretty much ready to go. All right, as you can see, I've done most of the painting. I've got the uh, just the plain bright white on that diamond kite, little thruster pods on the side, and section on top, as well as that dome. And then also, obviously, the blue on the main pod and the rear hatch. And as you can see, I've also taken off the masking off my little eye sensor things there, and it looks really cool. Let me go ahead and put it together so you can see the little eye sensor things there, and I really like that effect. I think they turned out pretty cool. Really pleased with that. I've also got a little eye, the main eye sensor, placed in. I've also uh, placed these halves on there, and then the little cap piece that glues on that holds that in place. So now it can, it's still positionable, so I can get it into whatever final pose I want it to be in. You can also see I've got the little domes on here, because I've basically done all the major painting on the legs that I need to do. I'm going to be doing, of course, a gloss coat to put some decals on, and then a final matte coat. And then just some detail painting in a few spots. This little thruster, some of the panel lining, that sort of thing. But so I was ready to put these on without worrying about them getting messed up, and they look cool, right? I think so anyway. So one thing I still have to do is I'm gonna have to work on this seam after it comes together. Ideally, it'd be best if I could have put these two together, cleaned up that seam before I did any of the painting on this. Thinking back, that I really wish I had done that. it would have meant that I couldn't have dealt with any of these pieces needing to be assembled after the fact, because I'd have to install these thruster pods, the top thing, of course the hatch, after I've already glued it together, which again, that wouldn't necessarily have been too big of a deal. I probably should have done it. That's going to end up giving me more work in the end, because I'm going to have to not only clean up these seams, kind of fill them in with putty and smooth them out so that the seams disappear. Then I'm also going to have to touch up my paint now. Oh well, in hindsight, yeah, I should have done that before I painted and then just dealt with installing these pieces after the fact. Another thing you might have noticed is I've got part of this painted with the dark. That's the charcoal gray. I did that because when I put this main sensor eye on here, then it just looks better, this eye sensor stands out more against the white of the pod here, and I think it just ends up looking better. So, but I've only done half of it because before I finish that, I did want to show you the contrast between the two, the unpainted versus the painted. Okay, so I'm going to get the two pod halves glued together and start working on that seam cleanup. I'm back and I've done a bit of work on this. I've put the two halves of the pod together and cleaned up the seams and just touched up the paint back to what it was, and that all turned out just fine. I've also currently I'm gluing on this hatch in the back, so I've got a piece of tape that's holding that on there while it dries. I've also done some weathering, detailing on these on the other pieces, basically everything except for the head at this point. And I don't know if you can see some of that detail on there, just some paint chip looking stuff, which is really just some of that dark charcoal paint on a brush, and just went through and kind of speckled it on in a few places. Just makes it look like it's scuffed and damaged. And then you can see down at the base of the feet, I did a lot more weathering on the feet, because I figure as this pod is running through a destroyed city, running over rubble and things, it's gonna get a lot of damage on the feet. So for that kind of light colored streaking on the toe, I just have a weathering pencil that has kind of a waxy consistency, and I just kind of drew lines on there. I'd never really done a lot of weathering like this. I don't have a lot of experience with that, and so I just decided to go for it, just see what works and what doesn't, what I like and what I don't like. And so far I'm actually pleased with the results. I've also done some weathering with metallic paints on here in a few spots, just to kind of simulate the effects of maybe some of the finish being scraped off. And so that's what you'll see. Most of what the actual dark colored weathering on these lightly painted portions of the legs are actually a metallic. And another thing which might be kind of hard to see, but you can see there are some spots where there's like light colored weathering in kind of in a lot of places, on kind of like around this panel here, and just kind of in random spots around the legs, and on these little sort of vent colored or vent shaped features, almost like some kind of gas has been venting out of there and leaving some discoloration, and around the panel shape on these. And what I did for that was I actually still have some paints left over from my USS Defiant build, and this is one of the colors I used. This was the actual base color for the main hull, and it's similar to the color I have on here, although it's a little bit darker. I did actually when I was doing some testing on the colors. So this is the color that I ended up using for the legs. So that's the color I ended up using, and then that color, that little tiny patch of more grayish looking color there is this. So yeah, so this color here is a mixture of Silver Marlin from Folk Art, and then also from Folk Art, this pale gray, and then I think a little bit of white. It ended up being just a little bit darker. If you want to see the actual mixes, the ratios of the paints for that, you can go back and look at my USS Defiant video. The part where I did the painting, I talked about all the color mixes on that. But it ended up being just perfect for adding just some dark discoloration for little patches of weathering. Similar sort of thing on the other leg. And then for the feet, like I said, this is the other part of the feet, the little side toes or whatever you want to call them. Did a lot more damage on those, especially down at the edges where it's going to be crunching through rubble. So more streaking and scratching and stuff like that. Couple more spots of battle damage where I actually scraped out some parts of the plastic and then just painted it a metallic color. So we'll see how it looks all together, and who knows, I might have erred on the side of maybe doing a little bit too much. We'll see. I suppose I can deal with that if that's an issue. Go back and kind of touch up some spots, tone it down. And then of course on the actual weapons themselves, I did a little bit of metallic highlights on the edges and some streaking on the lengths of the barrels, I guess you'd call them. But I'm not going to do as much weathering on the top portion of the pod. Just a few more metallic highlights on the main cannons. And then yeah, so I haven't done any weathering on the top yet. I just finished up touching up the paint here and took the masking off and retouching up the sensors. I'm going to go ahead and glue on the cannons, the top little anti-aircraft turret, the main sensor eye. Probably save these little tiny anti-infantry cannons for the end, because they're so small, and I know as I'm working with this I'll probably just break those off, so I'll save those for last. I think right now I'm going to go ahead and glue the legs on. That'll be it for this video. In the next video I'll finish up the weathering on the rest of the model, do the decals, and construct the display base. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.